Welcome to Dream Farm. Today we're going to talk about how to use fertilizer to make your food plots grow better. And obviously everybody knows you got to put fertilizer on, but understanding exactly what all those numbers mean, how to make the soil even more receptive to the use of fertilizer, that's the part that we all have to spend some time thinking about before we get into that food plot season. Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, the Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail app, and Hoyt Archery. So we're going to start with the basics, and the first thing you need to do is get a soil test. The only time I would say you don't need that is if you've got a lot of history with the property and you know more or less what you've got, where your starting point is, and then you can make your adjustments based on that. But if you don't know, you need to find out your starting point. You need to find out what the pH of the soil is, what your nitrogen, what your phosphorus, and what your potassium levels are. And the soil test will tell you all of that, and it'll also tell you, based on the various types of things that you would grow in there, how much of each thing you have to add. So the pH, you make the changes to the pH by adding basically lime. It's a calcium solution if it's liquid. It's a some kind of a pelletized mix of limestone, rich in calcium. If you're going with the pelletized lime, but at the end of the day, it's basically what's in lime. That's what raises the pH in most situations.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So does each type of crop that you would plant in a food plot, it would require a different composition of those minerals in order to grow the best?
Yeah, some of them are kind of generic. Like if you did clover and alfalfa, they're going to be really similar because they're legumes.
Right. Like corn and beans would be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and corn really likes nitrogen.
Right.
Stuff like the brassica blends, they really like nitrogen. Winter wheat, like a annual cereal rye. Those are all, they do really well with nitrogen. And they do like the P and K also, which is the phosphorus and potassium. That's what the numbers are, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So some of them have different needs to do well. So that's a good question. And the soil test will tell you that, and especially if you indicate what you're going to plant. But a lot of them are general enough that they'll give you the guidelines for various types of common things that you would plant.
I gotcha.
Yeah. But one thing that people don't realize, and it took me a long time to figure it out, is the plants can't uptake those nutrients without the correct pH. Mm-hmm. So everybody talks about lime or the pH as being maybe the most fundamental and the most important part of getting your soil right.
Is that why the cropland up in northeast Iowa is so much better than down in southern?
No, that has to do with a lot of other like organic matter in the soils, the type of soil, like it's already richer to begin with. The land in southern Iowa had a lot of clay component, and the land in central and northern Iowa has a lot more what they call loam or sandy loam. And it's just a richer media for the plants to grow in. Plus, the amount of, they call it drainage. Like they'll say a well-drained soil. That means the soil that the water can move through easily. Doesn't have a lot of clay component.
Right.
So some plants really like a well-drained type soil, which would be your sandy loams and stuff like that. They don't do as well in more of a clay base. You don't see hardly any alfalfa growing well in southern Iowa, but you see it all over the place in northern Iowa because of the differences in the soil.
That makes sense.
You hear people talking about black dirt. Oh, it's got really nice black dirt. Well, normally the black dirt is richer. It's just got more organic matter in it. There's dirt that in some places it's so rich it'll burn if you dry it.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, we got off on a little bit of a tangent there. But so let's get back to this whole thing about pH. If you want the pH to be, for most things that you're trying to grow, between 6.5 and 7. And it's not uncommon at all to get your soil test back and find out that your pH is 5.5 or it's 5.0, and that's really acidic. and the plants just can't uptake the nutrients as well. So you can put all kinds of fertilizer on there. It doesn't do as much good as if you got the pH up.
Right.
And then, started to apply fertilizer. There's a lot of science that goes into determining how much lime or how much of a remedy you need to add to the soil. Not only is it, how much of the lime that you put in there is active, and there's a formula for that. It's got something about neutralizing power. I think it's ENP, maybe. I can't remember. But anyway, there's an analysis for any kind of lime that you spread that gives a percentage or a number. And you have to know what that is if you're putting lime down, like on bulk level for ag purposes. You also have to know how easy it is to remedy the soil. So they do that with the soil test too. They break down like how much does it take for this type of soil to change, because some soils are harder to change the pH in than others, believe it or not. So all that stuff is part of the soil test, and it's important because just trying to get the pH right is a huge deal. A simple way to do it that I found, the soil test is important, but a lot of the places that I was planting, they weren't ag fields. They were an acre or two here, an acre or two there. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense then to have a guy come with a big spreader and, a gigantic pile of lime and spread it out there, because it's just, you don't need it. So I was just putting in pelletized lime every year, or spraying the liquid calcium. And the pelletized lime, you can usually get at any ag co-op, whether it's a lawn and garden store or probably just an ag co-op. And typical for me would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400 pounds per acre of that. So if you're doing a half an acre, 200 pounds, every spring when I was putting my fertilizer down, I'd put the pelletized lime down with it.
What would that be, like a starting pH of? Like, would that be if it was started at like 5.5 or something?
Yeah, that's right. And it's harder to get a really scientific breakdown of what exactly you need on such small plots, because it's really geared for the ag industry. They're looking at it saying, we're bringing in, a semi-load of ground up limestone. This is the analysis. This is how many tons per acre you need. But what we're doing is a lot smaller scale, trying to do something portable. So we end up having to do it annually.
Right. Would you rather err on the side of putting down too much lime or not enough lime if you were, because like you said, it's hard to know exactly how much to add.
Yeah. I mean, I think, most people aren't going to add too much.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so normally you're going to get people that run with acidic soil, especially if you're anywhere near the timber where you've got leaves that are on there that are rotting every year, and that makes the soil more acidic to begin with.
That was going to be my next question, was how would you approach that differently based on if it was an existing food plot in previous years or if it was a poor man food plot or something that you just created that season?
Yeah, and I would still do it probably roughly the same, just because I know that if anything else, I'm probably conditioning the soil a little bit at a time. Because that pelletized lime, it just isn't enough. I mean, let's say that your property or your field calls for 4 tons or 3 tons, of lime with the typical neutralizing power. Again, that's all broken out in the analysis of the lime when you buy it from the, whoever supplies lime. But you're not putting 3 or 4 tons of pelletized lime down. Even though it's a little bit more concentrated and it breaks down really quick and it goes to work quick, it might only treat the top inch or two. But if you put down, let's say your 3 or 4 tons of your ag lime, you're probably treating the top 6 or 8 inches of the soil because it leaches its way in. So that's kind of the difference, is you're just kind of making a temporary treatment with the pelletized lime. And then there's also liquid lime. I know the Whitetail Institute, one of our sponsors, has I think it's called Impact. I haven't used it yet. I'm going to try some this spring, but it's a liquid lime solution, and that's even more concentrated. And there's a lot of science behind that too. It's not just something that somebody ground up some limestone and floated it in some water. That's not what they did. There's a lot more science put into that. So that's the same thing. I think they recommend 2 jugs for a half an acre. And I would say I would just double it. I would double the rate if you're going into an area that has plenty of leaves before that. Again, where you're more likely to be very acidic, or you could get the soil test. And I haven't done one of their soil tests yet. I'm also going to do that, but they actually have a soil test kit. And you put the dirt in a little bag and you send it, and they'll send you back the analysis. So you don't have to try to figure out how to get the soil test done. You just purchase the prepaid soil test kit, put your dirt in it, mail it off, and a short time later, you get the analysis back telling you what you need to do. So I think that takes us hopefully through the pH. Bottom line is pH is important. And if in doubt, pour on the lime, whether it's pelletized or the liquid calcium. And both of them are fairly portable, for getting into smaller spots. And, like I said, contrary to the ag lime, which is not very portable.
Right.
Yeah. So now let's get on to the fertilizer itself. And I've planted just about everything under the sun, I think, that you can plant for a food plot. And the stuff that likes nitrogen, you have to be really careful with that, because it used to be you could get fairly stabilized nitrogen. I think it was ammonium nitrate was the stuff that we used to use. And then somebody had the great idea that they could blow up a building in Oklahoma City with that stuff. So it became a lot harder to get. So now the stuff that we get is less stable. It's urea is the typical, and that's very volatile. If you put that down on a hot summer day and you don't get some rain on it, maybe you got 2 or 3 days, you're going to lose a fair amount of that. It's going to evaporate into the atmosphere, because nitrogen isn't really that stable to begin with.
Right.
If you put it in the ground, it stabilizes and attaches, to the dirt, to the molecules of the soil. But if it's just sitting on top of the ground, it wants to go up. It wants to leave. So ideally what you do is you put down your nitrogen before a rain, or better yet, you spread it and then incorporate it by disking it in. But in some cases, you don't have a disc, or you're not able to run a soil tiller or whatever through there. Then I would only put the nitrogen down right before a rain, so that you're putting it into the soil. You're leaching it in before it tries to evaporate and leave.
Right.
So that's one precautionary note on nitrogen. The other two, the P and K, are very stable. They're basically, ground up, minerals.
Yeah.
That's all they
Which
are,
is like
really.
rock, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't go anywhere. It breaks down over time in the soil itself, but it takes a while even for that to break down. The ideal time to fertilize is, with P and K, is the fall before. So like, let's say you're going to put clover into a plot this spring. It would be nice if you'd loaded that spot up with P and K last fall. If you throw it on top of the ground in the spring, it still benefits.
Yeah.
It's not like that doesn't help you. It just isn't as effective as if you get it into the ground, a few months ahead of time. So let's go back to, let's pick turnips or brassicas, for example. Something like that. You're probably going to shoot for, well, again, we got to go back one more step. We got to get this whole thing about the numbers nailed down. What how much NPK. So if you say, I want X amount actual per acre. So let's say brassicas, you want to, I like to be in the 80 pounds nitrogen and like 60, roughly for brassicas. And that might be a little low, but I was trying to get by without spending too much money.
Right.
So then let's say that's how many pounds of actual you want, but per acre.
Right.
But let's say you planted a half an acre.
Right.
So you only need half that many pounds. We say, well, what does that mean? I'm buying triple 19 at the co-op. I'm like, yeah, this gets a little bit sketchy, doesn't it? Because triple 19 is 19% N by weight, 19% P by weight, and 19% K by weight. So that's what the triple 19 means. So anytime you see the number designations on your fertilizer, that's the percent active in those three, nutrients or minerals. N, P, I guess they're not minerals. What are they?
Elements.
Yeah. NPK. It's the percent of that bag, the weight of that bag, that's actually active in each of those.
I see. So in order to get, let's say you wanted 80 pounds, and just for the sake of argument, it's a 10-pound bag, and it's 19%.
Well, let's say it's 100 pounds.
100 pounds.
Yeah.
So then it's a 19 pounds of nitrogen
Per bag.
Per bag.
Right. So you're going to need at least 4 bags.
I see.
If you need 80 pounds.
I see.
So let's say you're trying to do 80 pounds per acre. Well, now you're down to 40 pounds for a half acre, right? Because those were my my base numbers. And like I said, they might be a little low. I'm sure there are people who just pour a lot more fertilizer, into their food plots than me. But I'm always trying to figure out, where that sweet spot is, where you get most of the best benefit without spending, a small fortune doing it. So let's say you're at 80, 50, 50, or 80, 60, 60, and you have to do triple 19. And you got a half an acre. So I'm not going to put you in that.
Please don't.
No,
I need my calculator.
I think we already solved it. So
Yeah.
you need 40 pounds of actual nitrogen. So if triple 19 is 19%, you get a 100-pound bag, you've got 19 pounds. So then if you did 2 bags, 200-pound bags, you'd have 38 pounds,
Right.
which is almost your 40, for the half acre.
Right. My question then is, what about the other two that are lower? You just kind of
You got more than you were hoping for there. You're kind of stuck with the bagged fertilizer rates because you can't adjust those. But when I was going to the co-op, what I would do, I get a fertilizer cart. I'd pull behind the tractor, a great big, tub, bin, and then you'd kick it on, and then there'd be, the ground driven, and the wheel would move the little thing, then it would spread the fertilizer out the back. And I might be doing, 20 acres or 30 acres of food plots at a time, on the other farm. Well, then I would just go in and say, hey, I want, 100, 70, 70. And they would come up with exactly that mix.
I see.
Because they would shovel it in, and they had they had a little computer, they'd punch it up and say it's exactly 100 pounds of this, and not 100, but 2,000 pounds or whatever it was. They had an actual program that told them how to get me exactly the combo that I wanted.
So on the larger scale, it was more customizable, but on the smaller scale, it's kind of like
you're stuck with whatever's in the bag.
One size fits all, and just buying more bags to fit your size food plot.
Yeah, I would say if you're shooting for a certain number, it doesn't hurt to go over that number, but the whatever is going to be your limiting factor, you want to get all of your numbers to at least where you want to be.
I see.
Yeah, so you're not falling short on P and K because you didn't want to shoot above the nitrogen.
Right.
So go ahead and shoot above and get your P and K. Whatever your lowest one is, get them all at least 2 or over what you're shooting for. If that makes sense.
Better to overdo than underdo.
Yeah.
Again. Okay.
Yeah. And because the P and K will last forever.
Right.
I mean, if your plants don't use it, it'll still be there. Nitrogen's the only one that's pretty volatile. If your plants don't use it up right away, it's going to be gone within a few months.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So let's look then at some of the other plants that you might put in the ground or seeds you might put in the ground. Again, if you're doing a green plot using cereal grains, you're probably going to be something like a 75, 50, 50, something similar to what you'd be with brassicas, because once again, those grasses really like nitrogen. Contrary to that, if you're putting down clover, I'd be somewhere, if possible, like 0, 75, 75 or 0, 100, 100, because you don't need the nitrogen. The clovers and alfalfas, they don't, I think any legume for the most part doesn't take nitrogen.
Right.
It puts nitrogen into the ground because it fixes it inside the soil. The roots, they pull it from the air, I guess, and they fix it in the soil. And same thing with soybeans. Typically, if you're in some kind of a rotation, you don't have to fertilize soybeans. But if you're going beans on beans on beans, then you got to hit it pretty hard with P and K. You got to start getting up into that 75, 75, 0, 75, 75. But if you're putting it like in a rotation between corn and beans, the P and K that you put down for the corn the previous year, a lot of it's still there. Because like I said, it doesn't go away. So you keep building it up with the corn, and then the beans come in and they suck up the P and K. So then you're going to get a certain amount of, they call it nitrogen credit for stuff like beans. Clover will do that too. Alfalfa will do that. They call it nitrogen credit. And really what it is it's just the equivalent of X number of pounds per acre of nitrogen. And you can look that up online. I used to know what those numbers were, but it's pretty sizable. Beans put in maybe, I don't know, 60, 70 pounds of per acre of nitrogen credit. So you can get quite a bit of benefit by going something that uses nitrogen the year after you had beans in there. Same thing with clover. I loved a rotation that had clover, and then I would rotate into brassicas for a year, and then back into clover again. And when it was in brassicas, a typical blend, like, again, we're talking the Whitetail Institute, so that the people have something like a frame of reference. A typical brassica would be like their winter greens blend, which is, a blend of forage brassicas. Those are the big leaves, it creates a lot of tonnage of forage. That's really a super good planting for midsummer, late summer, that it creates a lot of tonnage through the fall. And then when it plays out, it's only an annual, then I could go in there and spread my clover seed. And again, with the Imperial blend or the Whitetail Institute blends, their Imperial Whitetail Clover is just kind of a standard. I mean, that's been in the industry for as long as I have. So anyway, that would be a good rotation. Well, then that stuff starts growing in the spring and comes on strong, and then it runs for a few years until it plays out, because clover has a certain lifetime. And then let's say the late summer of year 3, you spray that. Maybe you don't even spray it, you mow it, till it in, because now you're getting benefit from that, not only just what it's done under the ground, but also by incorporating the green part. You get more nitrogen credit from that. Add a little bit of nitrogen, you're back into brassicas again, and away you go. So it's stuff like that is really nice. You can take advantage of the restoring power of some of these plants themselves. Trying to think if there's anything else we really need to touch on here. Corn, every farmer's got his own ideas of corn. When we were planting it commercially, I was always somewhere around 150 pounds of nitrogen, actual per acre, and then somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90 pounds P and K. And then again, that was really good for the following years when we would come in with beans again after that, because the P and K was already there. I didn't have to fertilize the beans. But if you're just planting a corn food plot, 125 pounds per acre of actual nitrogen is probably a minimum. You want to cut corners there, but the problem with corn is it's kind of all or nothing. It's not like you can get some small ears and you get an okay crop of corn by cutting the corners, but sometimes you run the risk of getting nothing. And you can say, well, for another $40 an acre, I would have had a nice robust crop, but instead I tried to skimp, and all I had were stalks, and that just didn't have enough oomph to really kick that plant into gear. So I don't like skimping on corn, because you can end up with nothing if you're not careful. And let's see what else. Every one of the plants, the seed blends that you find, like in the Whitetail Institute's library of products, will have fertilizing recommendations. And I'm sure that if questions come up, you can even contact the company and say, I'm planting this, how many pounds of this do I need? Because it's in their best interest, obviously. The seed companies, they want your crop to be successful, because they want you to keep buying their stuff. Right. So they're gonna
help you grow.
Help you.
Yeah,
that's right. So I think that should wrap up this whole discussion. And it's a little bit complicated, but again, I'm not going to go back and recap what those numbers mean, but it's not as bad as you think. You figured it out, right?
Yeah. I need a calculator. But...
No, it's not. Yeah, you might need a calculator. You might need to write it down a couple of times on paper to get a feel for it, but it's not like it's rocket science.
No.
So I think that's going to be it for this week. We're going to hopefully start getting into doing some of this work ourselves pretty soon. We're at the farm right now, but it was really windy outside, and we didn't want to try to do the interview outdoors because there would have been too much wind noise on the microphone. Plus, we thought you might get a kick out of seeing our little living quarters here. If you saw the way we lived back in September when we first started hunting up here and coming up here, is pretty bad, because your sleeping quarter was a sleeping bag
on a mattress, on a pile of plywood, on a trailer, in a barn.
In a pole barn. Yeah. So
It wasn't bad though. It's kind of like camping.
yeah, but it's only camping when it's like 50 degrees at night.
Right. I wouldn't want to be out there in December.
No,
That would have been pretty miserable.
no. So anyway, this is pretty comfortable by comparison. Did you have something you want to say?
I was just gonna say this is like the Ritz compared
Yeah.
to the barn.
Yeah, that was pretty rough. And we talked about today. We were saying the only thing we're missing here is a dishwasher. We started laughing because our dishwasher, when we first got up here, was our dog Bentley licking the plates clean.
Clean. Like you would have thought they went through an actual dishwasher.
And we did actually wash them after that. We didn't.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Well, that's it. We're gonna quit now before we talk ourselves into too much of a corner here. But we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember, I'm going to say it this time.
Okay.
To always dream big.